going to throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion.
Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys, as always. Zach Hubbard alongside of me here on a recruiting edition of the podcast, as Carolina has landed 4 guys on the recruiting trail in the last 3 days, 4 straight days with a commitment. And so we've got to get into all of the guys that we have yet to really talk to you guys about. Of course, I was on the other night talking to you guys a little bit about Jamarrion Gordon before I let you hear from Andrew Ivins. We're going to get into him. We're going to talk a little bit more about what he means for Carolina, because he is the biggest headliner that Carolina has here over these last few days. So we'll talk about him. We do have, a few other commitments that we're going to get into. Zamaurious Robertson, from yesterday, along with Lawrence Brown, who committed last night. And then, of course, earlier today, Keeyun Chapman. And at the same time, we'll be keeping an eye on his brother, Keeyun Chapman, to see what exactly happens with him, whether or not he does commit tonight or doesn't. We'll keep you up to date on everything that's going on around that recruitment. So let's start with Jamarrion Gordon. This makes the most sense to me because he is the highest rated prospect that Carolina has landed here in a little bit, ranked inside of the top 500 that we like to talk about as those blue chip prospects, the number 422 overall prospect, the number 39 safety prospect. This, of course, at the time that he ended up committing. They change the rankings, it feels like, every day on 24/7 Sports, especially with the composite, because guys are getting ranked as they end up landing with schools. I think you'll see that with Lawrence Brown when we talk about him a little bit later. I don't think he has been ranked. I'll actually check that here before we get to talking about him. But that's the thing. These rankings vary a lot. But this is a guy that we look at as a blue chip prospect. 39 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, a sack, 3 interceptions, 4 pass deflections, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery in 15 games last year when he was named the 4A Defensive Player of the Year by Around the State Sports. The previous year, also the 4A Defensive Player of the Year by Around the State Sports, where he had 30 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, an interception, 7 passes defensed, and a fumble recovery in 12 games. So this is a guy that's been producing for a few years now, was actually a producer his freshman season as well. And Zach, that's what's a little different about him as opposed to some of the guys that we've seen Carolina bring in this class. A lot of one-year producers at the high school level, and they're not necessarily looking at those numbers. They're looking more for traits. This is a guy that I think has a lot of the traits, but at the same time does have some production to back up with it, and that's what makes him such a compelling prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's sort of the thing that jumps off the page to you first and foremost. Is just this is a guy that even as a high schooler and a guy entering his senior year is a veteran football player at this level. I mean, he's a guy that's been contributing at the high school level since he's a freshman, which is not something that is particularly common. It's not, the smallest level of high school in the state of Alabama, but it's not the biggest either there at 4A, but it's good competition, I would say. And he's been a dominant player at that level thus far, like you mentioned. Is a safety from what I see sort of on film. May not be the rangiest guy, but I think he can play either of those positions. I think he could be a free or strong safety. He is a willing tackler. He is a guy that, plays the ball as a defensive back, which I think is something important. So I think that is a thing that they are looking for in their defensive backs, is just that experience and wanting to see that more so than at other positions where they feel more willing to sort of take a flyer on a guy. I mean, this is a staff from the head coach and Bill Belichick on down to the defensive back coaches and Armando Hawkins and Brian Belichick. I mean, this is a staff that prioritizes defensive backs all the way back to, the guys that were at New England and have since moved here to North Carolina, specifically Belichick. So it's a position that's always going to be a big part of this defense, which it's a defensive-minded staff first and foremost from the head coach on down. So I think this was a position that they really wanted to nail, and then going out and getting a guy like Gordon, they get a sort of known commodity that they can feel really strong as sort of an anchor to build around in whatever this future secondary looks like.
Yeah, I mean, with him, I thought the most the most important thing that stood out to me just right off the bat was the versatility. A guy that could really play just about anywhere in this defensive backfield. I mean, he played a lot of corner, played a decent amount of nickelback as well, but they loved him at corner. They wanted him on the outside. They wanted him matched up against the best receivers. And you talked about it. Really, I looked at the overall coverage ability across the board. I thought was outstanding, especially for someone that they put in a lot of one-on-one coverage situations out at the corner spot. That I thought that really stood out. He had very fluid hips, which allows him to seamlessly, stay with the receivers down the field, and had some pretty nice explosion in terms of his ability to get up and knock the football down. So really like all that stuff. I think his straight line speed is really good. Closing speed is really what stands out about him. And I think that's something that is, when you point to why does he make sense at safety, that's one of the main reasons why you could see him being a mainstay at safety. Also, I mean, there were times, especially with some of the offenses that were run at the high school level that he saw, where he was basically playing as an in-the-box type of guy because he was, having to cover a tight end, something like that, on his side of the field. And he was more than willing to come downhill and make plays in the run game. And so I think that's part of the reason why they look at him and think that he could be a safety. To me, doesn't matter where you play him. If you play him at corner and he sticks there and he's really that good, as good as he's shown on his film, then it's perfect. I mean, at 6 foot 185, I think he measures in pretty well. And I think he's definitely a really good fit there at that position. I talked about it a little bit the other night, but I think honestly, that's a guy that really it can fit just about anywhere in this defensive backfield. And we've talked about it with defensive backs in particular. That's one of the most important things that you can do is have versatility, because that's what allows you to get playing time. We've seen it over the years. Carolina's gone out and got a lot of guys that aren't necessarily position specific in the secondary. They're guys that can really play anywhere in that secondary. And it's what's led to some of these guys getting early playing time. So hopefully that will be the case for Gordon as well. With this commitment, Zach, now, 2 safeties committed in the class. At least we think 2 safeties committed in the class, because we got to figure out what exactly Julian Burns is. But, this is a position where I feel like if they do look at Burns as a safety, and if they look at Jamarrion Gordon as a safety as well, then I think they're probably done. And it doesn't really look like they have any other targets at the position outside of the two guys in the state of North Carolina, and then Darian Lewis, the guy that they hosted this past weekend out of the state of Texas, that's deciding between Carolina, UNLV, and TCU. So, I mean, look, I think Carolina, there's potential that they add one more guy here. I'd be shocked if they end up getting both of the guys out of Crest. I think with the commitments that they already have, it's probably going to be tough to get both of those guys. But what do you see playing out at this position now that they've got two potential commits at the position in this class? Oh, Zack dropped off there, unfortunately. He's having some trouble, it looks like, with his internet connection. So we'll try to get him back. We'll try to ask him a little bit more about Jamarrion Gordon and see if he can give us something on that. I think, like I said the other night, this is a guy that Carolina, could end up playing early. I think there's potential for him to be able to do that. But he's a guy that I think they're not going to rush along. They're going to figure out where exactly he's playing, as we got Zack back here. So, what did you think ultimately about what that defensive backfield looks right now, and what they may potentially do the rest of the class at the safety position?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you with sort of that general sort of overview of what they want to do at the position. They have what look to be two guys in Burns and Gordon. It feels like they could be with just those guys and not have any other additions. Maybe they add a third in one of the Crest guys that you mentioned, but it feels like really they can go either way here and feel like they're in a good position. A number of the other guys that, not only we'll discuss here, but also that they already have committed in the class, guys like Marcellus Ryan, Jaden Jefferson, are guys that, are probably going to be cornerbacks, but can play inside or outside. A lot of those nickel corner or star guys, whatever sort of terminology you want to use for that fifth defensive back, those are guys that often can end up playing safety as well. So I think that they are in a pretty good spot, just numbers wise at this position. I feel like there's already a pretty good number of options there, at least numbers wise, in the program already. And then, of course, the transfer portal, the defensive back position is sort of the position in the portal that tends to have the highest numbers, that and wide receiver. So I think they're good with what they have. They will have options depending on what they want to do, but really any path forward, I think, is something for, fans of recruiting and fans of the Tar Heels specifically to be happy about, in the coming future as it relates to this class.
All right, let's move on to the commitment from last night, because I think this is the next one that I circled as the most intriguing, and that is 2026 unranked edge rusher Lawrence Brown. And this is a guy that a lot of people are going to wonder, I think, if you turn on his film, why he is an unranked prospect. First of all, committed to Carolina over NC State, so Carolina wins the head-to-head matchup there. They had lost the head-to-head matchup earlier in the week, although I don't know if Landon Breedy, the offensive lineman out of the state of Ohio, was necessarily a take for Carolina with all the guys that they ended up having to committed already. But still, this was a guy that Carolina ends up winning this battle with, one of their first true head-to-head battles on the recruiting trail with NC State. But he's also a guy that held offers from Arkansas, Pittsburgh, Purdue, and Wake Forest, amongst others. So this was a guy that did have a lot of Division I prospects. And the reason why I'm saying that is because he is a 6'4", and it lists him as 195 pounds on his 24/7 sports page. Now, if you go to his huddle page, and usually I tend to follow that a little bit more. I've kind of learned this, especially over the last couple of years, that they don't really update the weights, the heights and weights of guys once they get them in the system over at 24/7 Sports. So I'm not sure when that profile was created for a guy like Lawrence Brown. So was that something that was created this year? When I watched him on film, I didn't think he looked that thin. So I'm tending to agree more with the huddle page that has him at 6'4", 210. A little bit more weight on him if you're going off of that. But I mean, this guy is incredibly impressive. I mean, you talk about the length that you can't teach, You've got the speed off the line of scrimmage, which I think is sensational. And I think he just wins constantly off the line of scrimmage, which is something that you really can't put a price on, especially for these guys on the defensive line, and especially for edge rushers. With guys that win with that speed off the edge, you've got to have an explosive release. You've got to have some burst off the line of scrimmage, and he's got that. And it makes it almost impossible for guys at the high school level to stay in front of him. And I think it's something that could translate over to the next level. We have seen these types of guys before, because the biggest concern with him is definitely his size. There's not a ton of physicality to how he rushes the passer because he doesn't need it, because he's got so much speed on the edge. Those are areas that it is okay to be concerned about with him. But the thing that I think is a little bit different than, let's say, Malachi Hamrick, who was a guy that was thinner, that stacked up a lot of sacks in his high school career while playing at that size. Curtis Simpson, another guy that was relatively thin, but stacked up a lot of sacks at the high school level, a lot of tackles for loss. Didn't feel like I saw this type of explosion. I think now this is the type of explosion that this is what you expect from an edge rusher of this size, is that they are going to beat just about everybody that they face with their speed off the edge, because of just how good of a release they get off the line of scrimmage, how good of a position it puts them in. And that's what you see. We've talked about it. Motor, incredibly important for Bill Belichick and this staff. They want to see guys that, hey, the play's not coming towards my side. I've got to be able to run it down. This is your guy. Motor runs hot for him. That's what I wrote down when I was going through his scouting report yesterday. I mean, it's running hot all the time. There's never a question. When that game starts, he's a guy that's out there to play every single play. So, I mean, look, the smaller guys that Carolina has gone after have not necessarily hit. You know, we've talked about even more recently guys like Tyler Thompson, yet to really break out. Jamarrion Harvey, a guy that may not even be on Carolina's roster anymore. Those are guys that were thinner players that never really seemed to work out for Carolina, but that was under Mac Brown. This staff, Zach, it's going to be all about how they develop these types of players. But I got to tell you, there's a lot to like about Lawrence Brown, and I could see why he was starting to roll in some of those Power 4 offers on top of the FBS offers that he already had. Oh, there he is. So, yeah, I was just saying, I could see why Lawrence Brown has been rolling, in some of these offers that he's been rolling in, because really just an incredibly explosive player, Zach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like a lot of the things that you see there, he is a guy that is explosive, is a guy with a high motor. The concerns right now, and what are likely leading to sort of the discrepancies in the rankings, are that size, listed at 6'4", like you mentioned. 24/7 Sports has him at, I think, around 195. Huddle has him at 210, while On3 has him at 202. So, you average at around 205. That's still pretty slight. And most of what you're seeing on film is him just going around guys with that pure athleticism. So I think there may be that question at the next level of how he handles contact, what sort of goes on as it relates to, setting the edge. I think that's going to be a concern as well. So in terms of his future role, I think that he could be a guy that is sort of your third down specialist as a pass rusher. I think that there's potential sort of with his frame. He's more of an upper body guy at this point. Could he be sort of that off-ball will linebacker that, rushes the passer a lot, but then drops back into coverage on occasion? Maybe. I think he has that versatility at this point so that they can fit him into different roles. That's what intrigues me. But definitely a guy that I think is underrated based on not only where he plays high school, playing at Grayson High School at Georgia, a high school that is consistently competitive in, probably a top 3 or 4 state in the nation for its high school football, but it looks pretty good against what are likely to be other college level offensive linemen. It's just a question, I think, in his senior year, and then once he gets on campus, as to how his body changes, what sort of weight can you put on this guy, and where can you play him. But I think there's definitely potential for him to have sort of that hybrid role as sort of a 3-4 edge linebacker, or just an off-ball linebacker that rushes the passer a lot, similar to a guy, different frame, I would say, and then different output, obviously, at the NFL level. But you look at a defensive role similar to a guy like Dante Hightower at the Patriots, that Bill Belichick had a guy that rushed the passer often, but played off-ball linebacker as well. So I think that might be the role that they carve out for him here. Right now, we're looking at a pure edge rusher, a pure sort of speed rusher, but I'm very intrigued by him, and I really like this pickup as another guy that has production, is showing athleticism right now, but I would still classify as somewhat not a raw prospect, but a prospect that can go a few different ways sort of into his senior season and potentially at the college level.
Yeah, that could be interesting. I would like to see him drop back into coverage and get a look at what he can actually do as an off-ball linebacker, because I do think that the athleticism is there. I don't think there's any question about that. And the ability, I think, would probably be there for him as well. But we just haven't seen it. I mean, this is a guy that, they like having him pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. Last year, 12 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 30 total tackles, 28 quarterback hurries. When you got a guy that's putting up those types of numbers as an edge rusher, it's going to be hard to say, hey, we need you to drop him back into coverage because we need to get a look and see if he's a guy that fits off ball. But I get what you're saying. I like with the athletic profile, maybe he's a guy that fits in there. And that's the thing. You want to be versatile. We talked about it. I think it's very important to be versatile on the defensive side of the ball more than anything, because you've got to be able to show that there are different things that you can do with your game. And look, even if he's a guy that you just drop back occasionally into coverage, even at the edge rusher spot, just so that you can get a look at that there, I do think that's certainly something interesting they can do. Now, I do want to get to the edge rusher spot just as a whole here, Zach, because I had somebody that asked me last night in one of the groups that I'm in on Twitter whether or not this means that Carolina is out on another edge rusher in this class. Because remember, they've already got Zavian Griffin-Haynes, Ashton Blatt both committed as well. Both of those guys in the around 6'5", 230 pounds. Both of those guys clearly edge rushers. Now you get Lawrence Brown as well. Does this mean that they are out of the running for Julian Walker? And I do think that is a very interesting question. I would say that it is probably a no at this point, that they are out for him. I think that he is a guy that is just too talented. As a 4-star prospect, he's too damn talented, where if he comes to you and says, look, I want to play at Carolina, you're going to find somewhere for him to play. But I do wonder if this sort of is hinting in that direction, that maybe, just maybe, Julian Walker has already let them know it's probably not going to be you guys, and it's probably going to be the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, I honestly think it could go either way. I think from one perspective, you sort of look at it of, does this eliminate him? Well, I would say no, from at least Carolina's pursuit of him, for several reasons. We've seen in sort of their pursuit in the transfer portal and then in this recruiting class, they are operating with the fact that they have 105 scholarships to dole out, and they are sort of being more aggressive than we've seen in previous years when staffs were operating with 85. They are willing to take any number of guys and sort of create a room of virtually any size and say, hey, go out there. We're going to play. Who's here, ready to play, who's ready to learn. If that's not you and you want to transfer, that's fine. So they're taking a more professional approach to some extent of, we're going to get the guys that we feel good about. We're going to let the dice roll where they may. And, as you mentioned, they already have Ashton Blatt and Zavian Griffin-Haynes. Could they add another one? I don't see any reason why they couldn't, especially in situations where they want to be multiple. They want to be versatile in the defense. It's likely that you're going to see, 2 of these guys at a time. in different packages, maybe, your nickel package or a third down package, anything along those lines. And a number of these guys could bulk up to be more of a strong side defensive end. So I don't really see it as sort of out of the picture. But like you mentioned as well, this is a guy from the state of South Carolina. The Gamecocks are courting very heavily and feel very confident there. So is it a situation where they've, already told the staff in Chapel Hill, hey, I'm probably leaning this direction so you can do what you want? Well, maybe, but I think really either way, they're not going to cut off this pursuit yet. I don't think they have. There's not been any indication that they've cut this off. They are just looking at all options. And, if they feel that a player is good enough to take, they're going to take them. They're not really super concerned with numbers right now. So that's sort of my read on it. And it could really go either way. And I feel like the staff is in a good position where they're able to, continue these pursuits of guys that seem like they have a heavy lean. And hey, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. We've got other options.
Yeah, I think they're just covering their bases. Like you're saying, I think they're just making sure that, hey, at that position, a very crucial position, we don't want to get caught with our pants down. A little bit like kind of what happened with this year's roster, where they had to go out and scramble. They had to go out and find a guy like Smith Vilbert that they could put at the position, who's now more than likely going to have to start. Get a guy out of the transfer portal from Delaware and Milcart Abu Jaudi. And I know those guys are more interior or more of the guys that are going to fit that defensive end spot rather than that hybrid outside linebacker role. But that's what I think they're trying to avoid, is a position like that, or, on the interior of the defensive line, where this year, they have had to scramble in the transfer portal to find guys on the interior of that defensive line. They don't want to be at that point moving forward. And so this could just be a depth grab. And hey, all of a sudden, Julian Walker, who you brought up South Carolina there, they're pretty much out. He did not take an official visit there. And I was stunned by that. I went back and looked, through social media. He did not take an official visit there. So I think they're out. And now it really comes down to whether or not Carolina can get the job done, or if he ends up at Michigan. And so this is going to be a really interesting battle to follow. If Carolina is able to get it done, I think they did a really good job back on May 30th. But I just wonder if it's enough, because the last visit that he took was to Michigan, and that one really stands out. It's always tough having to face a team that gets the last say, so we'll have to see, but I don't think this really takes away from that in any way. I think, if anything, it's just Carolina shoring these things up. All right, we move on to 2026 three-star wide receiver Zamaurious Robertson. I keep saying Robinson for some reason. He announced his commitment at a ceremony at his high school earlier yesterday, around like 5 o'clock. Carolina ends up landing his commitment over Charlotte, Coastal, East Carolina, Liberty, and Navy. So not going to blow you away in terms of the schools that he ended up committing to Carolina over. But this is one of the guys that went out to a prospect camp, earned a scholarship invite back on June 8th, and eventually takes his official visit to campus and commits to Carolina. So it's a great story for the kid, who hails from Dillon High School down in Dillon, South Carolina. This past season as a junior, caught 68 passes for 948 yards and 9 touchdowns, receiving 3A All-State honors for his performance on the defensive side of the ball. He also had 9 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 3 interceptions. So very effective on that side of the football. But I think he's probably going to stick on the offensive side of the ball. The previous year as a sophomore, started, to earn himself a little bit of a role, had 18 catches, 287 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So it's shown some flashes before, but last year was really his first full year as a starter, and he really broke out. And so, this is one of those guys that, look, when you watch him on film, there's nothing that's going to blow you away. There's nothing that you're going to come away from watching his film and saying, man, this guy is really great in this one particular area. But what I saw a guy that's really solid all around, and someone that I think, provides a little bit of versatility because he has the frame of someone who can play either in the slot or on the outside. I think, there's enough twitch there as well, where he could be able to play in the slot. You see it at times. It's not often, but you do see it in some of the routes that he runs. Love his speed after the catch. Maybe love is a little bit strong, but I do like it. I think there is potential there. He ran a 4.53 40-yard dash. So it's solid. Again, it's solid. It's nothing that's going to blow you away. It's not going to be a guy who's going to go to any sort of combine and wow you with, 4.3 speed. But it's a guy that, plays fast in game, has some shiftiness that allows him to make defenders miss in the open field. Does a good job of winning on routes, really at all three levels, especially in the short and intermediate portions of the game. And I mean, look, he's one of those guys that's going to have to diversify his route tree because it's very simple. A lot of slants, a lot of deep posts, or, even intermediate posts, routes. And then, of course, the go routes down the sideline. So I don't think there's a lot of creativity to his route running, but I do think that he runs routes very hard. That's a smart thing to do. That's what you want to see from kids because it allows them to free themselves up. And that's the most important thing. He was just able to get himself free on film and be able to make plays. And so, this is one of those ones, Zach, that I don't know if this is a name that you have to know day one coming in, because I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to affect it like that. But I do think that with just how solid he is as a player, I do think there is still some potential there for him to eventually make an impact when he gets to Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where I agree that he is not a guy that from the film, you look at one specific trait and, that's his calling card. That's the thing that he sort of, attaches his name to. But I think he's a very solid guy, a guy that even despite that, I think is a little underrated, listed as, 1,577th in the nation. I think he's probably at least a top 1,000 guy just on my opinion and what I see, just because of his reliability. He's a guy that is at the very least competent in everything. And that's not always the case with some of these high school guys. I mean, they may be guys that rely on, one thing and they have a specific deficiency, but they sort of make up for it with their singular strength. This is just a guy that's well-rounded in a lot of things that he does at the wide receiver position, can play both inside and outside, whether that's in the slot or on the outside. Probably will have to sort of develop that route tree, but I think that's sort of common for what we see at the high school level and just the offenses that they are able to run with the entirety of their roster at that level. At 6'1", 165, so a little bit slight right now. Really, my question would be, if he gains, 15, 20 pounds, what does that do to his speed? I think that's going to be the question at this point. But this was a guy that, camped in person for this staff, earned his offer, went through his official visit, and was allowed to commit. So for me, in terms of a future role, what I look at as a potential future number 2 or number 3 receiver, maybe not your main guy, but sort of your Mr. Reliable. He's not the guy that's going to take it 65 yards for a touchdown, but do you need a catch over the middle on 3rd and 7? Do you need an 8-yard out route consistently time after time again? This feels like that could be that guy. Maybe not the flashiest guy at a position that is sort of defined by its flash, but certainly a guy that I think people will appreciate down the line. Maybe not year one, like you mentioned, but sophomore, junior year, could we see him sort of carving out a role? Maybe. And I think he's a guy that definitely coaches are going to appreciate his consistency to approach, his sort of just his technique, I think, at the position. And I think he can definitely carve out a role in the program in that aspect moving down the line, maybe year 2 or year 3.
Yeah, the reliable hands are definitely something that I think you look at and you feel confident in. It's just, is there going to be enough room in this wide receiving core? And that's especially a position where we saw, during the fall window that Carolina was not afraid to bring guys in out of the transfer portal at. So it'll be interesting. I do think that he is a guy that deserves an opportunity here, though. And I think he's certainly one that, you never really, it's just, you never know. You never know the guys that are going to end up being standouts. We've seen it before, guys that have really come out of nowhere, guys that were ranked outside of the top 1,000 that all of a sudden become darlings. And this is one of those guys that you better bet is going to come in here motivated to prove that he deserved to be on this roster. Now, this is a very similar conversation to the one that we just had about edge rusher. How does this affect the rest of the wide receiving core in terms of the guys that Carolina is looking at and targeting? I don't think it affects it at all. I'm going to be real honest with you. I think that any of the guys that are thinking about coming to Carolina, I don't think that they're going to be dissuaded by this commitment. You know, you got Kamori Miles, the wide receiver that was already committed in the class. Still have to figure out where exactly Jaden Jefferson is going to play, but I'm with you. I think if I remember correctly at the time of his commitment, he was really being heavily recruited. Of course he was, by Armand Hawkins out of the state of California, but I believe they were looking at him to be a guy that played corner, played that nickel corner spot. And so if he is there, that means that Carolina only has 2 commitments in this class. And like I said, there is some versatility to Robertson. I think he's a guy that can play in the slot. So it really comes down to these big guys. I don't think this is standing in the way of Keeyun Chapman. I don't. I think that is just a guy that's waiting on his decision. And right now, as of 7:42 on Friday night here, we haven't found out. Now, the rumors were that he was going to announce. There were, a few articles online that were written about it. He would announce today. Not sure if that's still the plan, but hopefully, there is some sort of decision coming sooner rather than later on that front. Travis Johnson, Carolina, Michigan, the 2 teams that are really battling it out for him right now. I know there are some other teams in there, but it feels like those are the 2 schools that are definitely trending for him right now. I don't think that's going to stand in the way of him potentially committing to Carolina. And those are really the 2 main guys that we're looking at, because they missed on Jaden Petit. He announced his commitment to Wisconsin yesterday. I don't think Chase Campbell is going to end up coming to Carolina. I think he's going in a different direction with his recruitment. I think he's probably going to be staying somewhere out west, potentially in the state of Texas. But I do think with those other 2 guys, I do think that Carolina has a legitimate chance to bring both of those guys in. And to me, Zamaurious Robertson is not standing in the way of those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned, we're still waiting on a guy like Keeyun Chapman, which we think could commit today, but I still think he would have a committable offer, definitely. And then other guys, such as the ones that you mentioned, Travis Johnson being one that North Carolina is battling Michigan for. They brought in a few guys on official visits that sort of last week that we had here between, guys like CJ Sadler and Carnell Warren, even Walker Bryson, a guy still sort of on the radar in terms of the wide receiver position. So they only have 2. And I think that this is a position similar to, what we've seen from offensive and defensive line, from defensive back, where they're not worried about numbers. They are just getting who they feel good about and throwing them in that room. And if the room's crowded, so be it. Just let nature take its course, and the reps will figure themselves out. And if guys want to transfer, that's fine. So I think that's how they're playing this position as well. I think they're likely to take 3, if not 4. So I don't foresee there being any issue here with this guy that they're taking. Obviously, they're still in contention for a number of these guys, and I think that they have room. If there's 2 guys that want to jump on board, I don't think there's any issue with them taking, 2 of sort of this handful of 3 to 5 guys they have remaining at the position.
Yeah, Carnell Warren, a great job mentioning him. He's a guy, too, that just completely slipped my mind. No doubt he's a guy that's got a committable offer for Carolina. They are really high on him. The kid out of Bluffton High School up there in Bluffton, South Carolina. So really, I mean, the state of South Carolina, the Tar Heels are looking to pull another guy from, and they're hoping, I think, honestly, that's one of the guys they feel best about, because his only other official visit outside of where he was originally committed, which was Virginia Tech, was to Chapel Hill. So I feel like they like their chances there. Walker Bryson is very interesting because he's a guy that, was listed on 24/7 Sports as a safety. I think he, from judging off of where he played at Rabun Gap High School, I watched them last year when Carolina had Marshall Pritchett committed there. Watched 2 games, never saw him take a snap at safety. Now, maybe I wasn't watching the defensive side of the ball as intently as I needed to, but he's a guy that I think really fits in as a slot receiver. And then you mentioned, C.J. Sadler. That's one that's very interesting because I think Carolina has a good shot there, but I also think that there is a chance that he ends up at Colorado. And then, of course, the in-state schools that he's still considering. If Michigan is willing to make his offer committable, then there's no question that that's where he's going. That's where he's been trending really since the minute that he became a recruit. And then Michigan State, that's another school. That's a school that he officially visited. So you can't count them out either. That's a group of 5 that I think you're right. To me, you're probably going to get 3 out of that group. And the guys that I feel most confident in right now are Keeyun Chapman, Carnell Warren, and Walker Bryson. And I think that they will take all of those guys. They'll figure it out at the wide receiver position, even though there's only one upperclassman or at least one guy with experience at Carolina this year in Kobe Paysour. Nobody else has really done much in their career to this point. But I do think that Carolina will be willing to take this many wide receivers and really figure it out in that room. And, this is one, too, where, with Zamaurious Robertson, I know he's committed to this class, but this is a guy that I don't think Carolina is going to be afraid to recruit over. Now let's get to, we just talked about Keeyun Chapman and what's going on with his recruitment. He, by the way, down to Carolina and Florida State. Those are the 2 schools that he's deciding between. And again, we're going to keep monitoring that here as we go throughout this edition of the podcast. And then, later on tonight, if we're done on here, we're, of course, going to be making sure that we're keeping you up to date on anything that's going on with that over on the website. If he does end up committing, we're going to have something up about that as soon as we possibly can. But earlier today, his brother Keeyun Chapman, he ends up committing to Carolina. And this one is very, very similar. To be honest with you, it's almost even more of a, I wouldn't say head scratcher because it's clear what they're doing here. I think it shows you that they are taking this commitment in hopes that they can get Keeyun to commit, because Chapman chose Carolina over offers from Austin Peay, North Alabama, Sanford. That's right, Sanford, not Stanford, Sanford, and West Georgia. He was offered by Carolina back on June 2nd while he was in the midst of his official visit to campus. You look at him, unranked prospect, hails from Jackson High School down there in Jackson, Alabama. So Carolina really trying to corner the block on the guys that are coming out of Jackson High School down there. This past season as a junior had 36 total tackles, 1 interception, and 16 passes defensed, all while playing in 15 games for the school as they went to and won, I believe, their 6A state or their 4A state title in the state of Alabama. Guy that measures in 5'11", 160 pounds. I thought he was intriguing. I thought there were elements to his game that were very intriguing, but I do think that it's understandable why he is not necessarily ranked highly. Talked about earlier, guys that are 1-year producers. That's what he is. He's a guy that this was his first year on varsity. He played pretty well, and that's, was a guy that clearly didn't do enough to jump onto a lot of the bigger radars, but did enough to where Carolina can say, look, we can stomach taking him on if it means that we can get your brother. I thought pretty strong man coverage corner, really smooth, with his hips, I think getting in and out of breaks, really liked the straight line speed. And I thought, he did a pretty good job playing the football. 16 passes defensed is not something to bat an eye at. That is certainly something that I think is very encouraging. Is in the same range as his high school teammate, Jamarrion Gordon. So I do think that, both of those guys, and especially him, he's an aggressive player. That's the thing that really stands out, is how aggressive he is going after the football. So I like some things about his game. I also thought promising tackler, and shows the motor. Again, a guy that's, a couple of times on film has to run a play down from behind, shows the speed off there, but also shows the hustle that, this Carolina team is looking for, this Carolina staff is looking for. So some things to like about his game, Zach, but it does make a little bit of sense why he's a guy that's unranked at this point, and that will probably be pretty lowly ranked in this 2026 class when he does get ranked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it all comes down to sort of the disconnect between what you see on film and then just the measurables as to why he's ranked where he is. 16 passes defended, that jumps off the screen no matter who you are, as a guy that, this is his first year and immediately comes out ready to play at the high school level at what is a high level for a pass defender. Plays inside and outside, but is 5'11", 160 pounds. So, there's a question of, is he going to get taller? For a lot of staffs and the defensive backs that they recruit, they're sort of 6 feet and up is the minimum that they look at, and they're not going to look at anything lower than that. And then 160 pounds, pretty slight still. Is there room on his frame to grow? And what is that going to do about his speed? Sort of either whether it be speed to follow guys vertically or to play sideline to sideline. We don't know that at this point. So I think that this is a guy that, like you mentioned, there is that element that they are taking him in the hopes that his brother will follow. And it seems like, we don't know yet, but that's sort of the assumption that there could be a possibility of that. But he is a guy that we'll sort of have to wait and see what he can do at the college level just because of those measurable traits. But there are guys at North Carolina and other schools that we see all the time that, what they have from a height and weight perspective doesn't necessarily match up to what we see as sort of the prototypical makeup of a guy, but that can produce at the college level. So I am curious, as you are, to see sort of what he can become at that level. I don't know. It's hard for me to project at this point, just based on, that combination of height and weight. If you had one or the other, maybe you could justify it, but those two together do, lead to some questions here. But I think there's definitely at least a path for a special teams role, just based on what's on film with his speed in space, his ability as a tackler, his ability to sort of follow guys. I think at least that can be a role that we see. He did some kick and punt returns a few times. Maybe that's a role in the future that he can sort of carve out that are not as dependent on, your height necessarily or your weight, like playing multiple snaps or multiple minutes there. So we'll just have to wait and see, I feel, at this point. But it does feel like that's a pretty accurate assessment, at least right now, that they're taking a flyer on a guy, not only because they have increased scholarships, but because they would like, a teammate and a family member to also be part of this class potentially here in the near future.
Yeah, and I think, that's something that seems pretty obvious here, but at the same time, I mean, there is still just enough potential there that I think Carolina deems it worthy taking him on. We'll see where he ends up fitting in. You're right. I will say that, if you look at the height and weight of Elijah Huzzy, that might not necessarily be a guy that you would think would play on the outside, but he did at Carolina. He was very successful, and so you never really know for a guy like Keeyun Chapman what could work out for him. So those are the four guys that Carolina has landed. In terms of the guys that Carolina has not landed, we mentioned that Keeyun Chapman, we're waiting to see if something happens. As of right now, I don't see any sort of update as to whether or not he's going to commit tonight or not. So we just have to kind of wait and see. Again, it is kind of weird that his brother did announce earlier today, and he, being a guy that is considering the school that his brother committed to, has decided to wait it out. I do think that means that it probably is a toss-up. It probably is a very difficult decision for him to have to make. And so we'll just have to continue to monitor that situation. In terms of the other situations that are going on, Carolina has found out that they are out for a decent group of guys. As I talked about earlier, Landry Breedy committing. He was the 3-star offensive tackle out of Mentor High School up there in Mentor, Ohio, of course, place that you should remember, Tar Heels fans, because that's where Mitch Trubisky came out. If you are a real sicko, you will remember that he also brought along with them Brandon Fritz, his tight end, who came out of that same high school. So he ends up committing to NC State over Carolina as well as Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, Jaden Pettit, who Carolina was in on as well, he ends up committing to Wisconsin over Carolina, Oklahoma, and Missouri. Both of those happening yesterday. Also yesterday at the OT 7 camp. This is the new camp that they have. This is the new big thing that they've been doing. I believe it's put on by 24/7 Sports. Saquel Patterson, who was on campus at Carolina during the month of June, a 4-star wide receiver from the state of South Carolina. He committed to South Carolina. No shock there. That was one that even when Carolina brought him on campus, it was I think it was known that he was probably not going to commit to Carolina. That was just one where they were throwing a Hail Mary, seeing if they could get a guy that's from the Charlotte area, and it didn't necessarily work out. And then you do have the last guy in the 2026 class that ended up committing. This one earlier today, Tyreek Jemison. We knew he was going to announce his commitment. He is going to Kentucky, the team that got the last shout for him. It was clearly enough, and so he is going to be a Wildcat. Not shocking. Carolina, with as many guys as they've taken along the offensive line, feel like, that makes sense that they don't end up landing a guy like him, especially because he's an interior offensive lineman. So that makes a lot of sense. I think tackle-wise, Carolina may still be looking to add a guy, but we'll have to wait and see. Meanwhile, in the 27 class, Sean Kraft, the 2027 long snapper that Carolina had offered out of the Asheville area, he is committed to Notre Dame. And so Carolina with a few different targets off the board there. One guy that is still on the board, Khalil Sanogo, the 3-star offensive tackle out of the state of Texas. He is going to announce his commitment on July 6th. Carolina, one of the Final Four for him, along with Arizona, Cal, and UNLV. Boy, UNLV with Dan Mullen doing some good things, ending up in a lot of these top schools lists, along with some power conference programs. So we'll see ultimately where Khalil Sanogo ends up. I feel decent about that one because Carolina got him on campus. They did get him to cancel a visit that he was supposed to take to Kansas State after that. I'm not saying that that was the reason, but the timing definitely seems like it's something. So we'll have to see. Maybe he ends up being Carolina's other offensive tackle commit in the class, but only time will tell. And we will have you covered on the website, heeltupblog.com. Make sure you guys head over there. Check out all the articles that we just that we had on all the guys that we just talked about. All of the guys that have committed in the last 4 days. We have articles up about every single one of those guys. So make sure you go and check out those articles. We would greatly appreciate it because I go even a little more in depth in terms of the film breakdown, the stat breakdown, all of that kind of stuff. I go a little more in depth than we even did here on the podcast. So make sure you go back and check those out. And then, any other news that comes out around the recruiting side of things, the next commitment that we are watching doesn't appear like there's one tomorrow, at least one that's scheduled for tomorrow. The next scheduled one is Sunday. That'll be the 4-star interior offensive lineman, Brandon Anderson out of North Cobb High School there in the state of Georgia. So that's one that we're going to be keeping an eye on. I wouldn't go in feeling too positive if I was a Carolina fan. That's more for the Tennessee fans, but certainly is a guy that we will be keeping an eye on with Carolina having so many offensive line targets in this class that are still yet to announce their commitments. So still keeping an eye on all those guys for you over on the website. And then did just, find out some news. Not sure if we're going to be putting it in an article. I'm going to get this confirmed, but do have some rumors about what is happening with one of the guys that was on Carolina's roster last year that is no longer appearing on the active roster. And so if I can get that confirmed, I will put up an article for you guys. If not, we'll just leave that until it is officially confirmed. But any news on the roster, the status of the roster, and of course, any other news around the team on the field, we will have you covered with all of that. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, it's recruiting time as well. There are a ton of recruits that Carolina has offered here recently, and one recruit that Carolina has landed an official visit with, a big name in the 2026 recruiting class. Go find out who that is, when he'll be on campus, and keep it locked to the website for over the next couple of weeks, as we expect that some of these guys will start setting those upcoming visits to Chapel Hill during that time frame. And of course, any other news that comes out around the program. I know that some people are still wondering about Luka Bogobac's possibilities of being cleared for this year. There is some red tape that they're going through with him. So will he get cleared? If we find out any information on that, you know that we'll have something up on the website about it. And we'll be talking about it over on the Four Corners podcast side of things. Same place you find the Heel Tough Blog podcast. If you're a listener to it, make sure you subscribe to both of those podcasts. Meanwhile, want to promote the social medias as well. Best place to get everything that you guys are looking for, whether it is the articles, the audio editions of the podcast, the video editions of the podcast. Go over to Twitter at Heel Tough Blog on Twitter. Give it a follow and turn on the post notifications. That will be the best way for you to keep up with everything. If you do that, it'll give you a notification anytime that we post anything. So any news that we post, reactions that we post here, when we do these live editions of the podcast, all that stuff will be sent directly to you, sent directly to your phone so that you know what's going on. And then make sure you also head over to the Facebook page, give us a like and follow there. That'll tell you whenever we go live. If you're on Facebook, it'll tell you when we're going live. And then it won't send you every article. It won't give you that on your phone, but we'll put it on your timeline, and we would greatly appreciate the like as well. That would definitely help the page out. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. I want to thank Zack for hosting with me. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.